So thank you for everyone for joining Avallone's masterclass on saving time on your bank KYC. This session is being recorded, so anyone that's not able to attend today will be able to watch this later on. And for those of you who are here today, if you have any questions, there should be a Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar, kind of in the middle. So you should be able to pose your question, and then we'll have time at the end of our hour where we'll review and answer any of the questions. So with that, I think I'm just going to give you a quick overview of our agenda today. It's going to be about 40-minute discussions that Lars and Egli and I will have. We'll introduce ourselves in a little bit. And then afterwards, as I said before, we'll have time for questions from everyone in the audience. And for those of you who are watching the recording, I'll provide an email address at the end that you can also send your questions so that then we can get back to you and answer anything that you might have coming out of this masterclass. So with no further delay, in terms of introductions, I'm Ada Chan, the VP of Strategy and Planning at Avallone. And amongst many things I do, I concept and develop our evangelism and outreach efforts. So I've worked in a variety of industries, but for the past decade, I've really focused in on ethics and compliance. And today I'll be the host, if you will, for this masterclass, talking to my very knowledgeable colleagues here with me. So Lars, if you'd like to start with an introduction on your background and what you do at Avallone.
Yes, sure. Yeah, so my name is Lars Morch, or Mørk, if you're Danish. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer here in Avallone, so I'm the overall commercial responsible and for our go-to-market strategy in Avallone. Been here for a year and a half, and I've been, during that year and a half, I've been probably speaking to 150 different clients, so I have a pretty good understanding, I think, of some of the KYC needs and wants out there. And for me and for my past, I've been in almost 30 years in the software industry and been in companies like Salesforce, Workday, SAP, and SaaS Institute. Yeah, I come with hopefully a lot of knowledge around software, but also a pretty good understanding of KYC.
Great, thanks, Lars. And Egli, if you can give the audience a couple of words about your background.
Yes, for sure. So my name is Egle. I'm the FCP Services and Support Lead here in Avallone. So before joining the company, I was a part of anti-money laundering industry for 5 years while I was working in a bank. So I've got to cover all types of KYC processes, as well as the sanctions and the PEP and adverse media screenings. So I could say that during that time, while I spent there, I've got to cover both parts now of the KYC and got to see all of the KYC struggles that the banks have and also the companies. So that's a good perception of both sides, let's say. So that's what I will try to bring out today.
Great, thanks, Egli. So in this masterclass, I think everyone here attending knows what KYC is or probably does. But just so we're all on the same page, Lars, could you quickly tell everyone what you think KYC is and what the components are?
Yeah, so I think, bottom line, KYC is in place to ensure that banks and their customers are real, and KYC is in place to assess and monitor risk. And of course, this is to prevent a number of different things, like money laundering, terrorism financing, or other illegal corruption schemes. So KYC is the process of identifying any counterparty and understanding the components of the relationship, meaning the ultimate beneficial owner structure behind it. I think that's probably my 5 cents on that matter.
Cool. So then, knowing what KYC is, then when and why do companies get KYC from banks, Egli? I think you're a great person for this question.
Well, companies, they usually get the questionnaires usually in the beginning of the year, or at least the first half of the year. Of course, sometimes it depends and varies, but that's the usual timeline. This ensures actually that there's enough time for companies to answer the questionnaires, and for that, sometimes very much needed back and forth communication between the bank and the customer if any adjustments or extra information is needed. And following to the second part of why, right? Why it's needed. So the KYC term, it kind of sums it up, right? Know your customer in general. So the main goal of it is to get as much information as possible about the company and understand its business and the way how it's working. So it also, that information collectively helps to prevent banks and any other organization who's collecting information from breaching those anti-money laundering regulations.
Yeah, no, that's correct with that. And I think also I would add that if we dig a little bit deeper into why banks do KYC, ultimately it's to fight financial crime. So, you know, banks, to my knowledge, are under strict and comprehensive legal requirements to collect KYC. And by doing this, they're making sure that criminals are not misusing the financial system for things like money laundering or other financial crime related activities. You know, with this, really, it's so that banks can protect their reputations. And for that, it's really at all costs. You know, history has shown that if you're involved in money laundering, it has a detrimental effect on a reputation, even if it's peripheral or you know, not on purpose, of course. So ultimately, banks, bankers, you know, and everyone involved here are decent people, and we don't want to be part of any money laundering schemes that are going to have, you know, crimes associated like extortion or drug trafficking, illegal arms trading, human trafficking. Really, it's kind of one of the kind of overarching reasons that we're doing this. So then getting back into a little bit of the bank and setting up sort of the story, if you will, and what we're going to get into. I see some questions about like what we would do, and we're going to get into that after we kind of set up the problems of why we want to improve. Is that with Egli, with your experience in the bank, what does KYC look like from them? And what I mean by that is everyone knows about the questionnaires. Can you tell us a little bit about like what these forms or questionnaires are like?
Yeah, for sure. So during that time, while I was a part of the bank, I can say that there are many different forms of how the questionnaires can be presented to the customer, right? So first things first, it can be a paper or a digital form in any different format. Of course, the paper forms are already in the old days, right? But I'm pretty sure that some of the companies might use them anyways. So it varies from the Excel sheets, from the PDF forms to even online forms that the companies can submit. So depending on many things, they can be short and long. For example, the main criteria is the KYC process itself, because there are different parts of the KYC process. So it plays a big role in that. And the base of those questionnaires is usually the same, but of course it depends on the business activities, the complexity of the company, and also the locations of businesses where the questionnaires might actually be expanded drastically.
So that's makes me think, you know, if they all have the same base, then why are some questionnaires over 100 questions? Like, why are there so many questions?
That's a funny question, but a very important one. So yes, while you're collecting the KYC information, right, you might need some extra internal information to be obtained about the customers and their businesses, which you would not be able to get in any of the open sources. And this is a part of the KYC information validation as well. It's not enough, you know, just to get the filled paper and approve it. You must make sure that it actually makes sense and is legit. And of course, the 100 questions, right? It very much depends on the risk of the customer itself. So in those instances, you might need to dig deeper into very specific details. And yeah, that extends the number of those questions. And of course, none of the companies would like to fail and, you know, to complying with the ML requirements. So that's why it's important and sometimes way too long.
Yeah, I have definitely answered some on our behalf here and in other places I've worked at that take up a lot of time.
Yeah, so you know what it means.
I think the other thing that I wanted to, you know, ask both of you actually is that, you know, speaking to my experience and filling out KYC when I'm doing it on our behalf or in other places I've worked at, the KYC is also like, so even though there's the same base, they're not the same bank to bank. So why are there these differences and why can't they be, the industry word that gets a little bit polarizing is like, why can't they be standardized? Why isn't it the same experience? Because they're asking all the same questions ultimately. I guess Lars, what do you think about that?
I think to Egle's point before, I think so KYC is not a legal discipline, it's a risk discipline. And any bank will perceive any counterparty or any customer with different risk. So a bank will ask the number of questions they feel they need in order to satisfy their risk or the risk profile they see at the client. So that's why they cannot agree or they cannot have the same standard, because if it was a legal format, then it would be the same, but it's not. And of course that then happens for the clients, which of course feel the pain, right? Because we get this Groundhog Day syndrome, right? Where you wake up every morning and you feel you're answering the same question over and over again. And I think that's probably why the pain is so big out there right now, and why let's be real, this is not gonna get better, right? It's probably just gonna get worse, unfortunately.
It's actually funny you say Groundhog Day. We should have maybe had this webinar a couple days later on Groundhog Day.
Exactly.
Egle, what do you what's your experience in terms of like, why aren't these experiences the same?
Oh, well, let's start with the thing that for some time when KYC started, in general, no one actually knew what should be asked and how extensive it should be. So every bank tried their own way of collecting the information in different ways and formats, right, as we talked before. So some of them failed, some of them succeeded. So that's why the forms are being adjusted when needed, even until now. So there is no one standard, as Lars mentioned. Each bank has the same base, just presented in a different format or different words. It depends mostly on the internal agreements, the different countries' regulations, and the tolerance of the business of each bank. So the banks themselves, they might be providing also different products. So the questionnaires might have different adjustments even to that part. So it's there's a lot of components that actually make those questionnaires different. And in general, there are so many different people working in the bank and have different preferences that it's really hard to have that one standard questionnaire and one template, let's call it that.
Makes a lot of sense. We're getting close to having all the tips and sort of like the tricks, but I also want to touch on this one sort of experience that maybe some of the people in our audience, if they haven't been employed by the bank, don't get exposed to, which is Egle. So in your experience working at the bank, how have you sort of perceived KYC questionnaires, or maybe more like answers? And if there's any off the top of your head, some insights or tips to share on what you've experienced, like getting the KYC questionnaires back.
Yeah, well, I can definitely say that it was a very eye-opening and challenging experience from many different perspectives. But a lot of people think that KYC is just collecting information and answering questionnaires, but that's the only part where the customer is involved, right? They don't see what comes around. So the KYC process itself, it consists of more processes and different actions. So working in a bank really showed me how it looks like from the core, and how important it is in general. You wouldn't even think about how many resources banks need to comply with that part of the regulation and perform the KYC in a very good quality. So that is where the customer comes in, and the customer's role becomes very important. They have to, take care of that responsibility as well. And nowadays, companies see banks as the KYC villains, how I like to say that, but the customer's cooperation with the bank is the most important part of that whole KYC journey, and it comes for both sides equally.
Yeah, it's super interesting with that. I think then, like on the flip side, and Lars, I asked you this because you deal with the companies, then how does this sort of bank perspective put companies on the reactive and not on the proactive, maybe even also like on the defensive even?
Yeah, I think first of all, I think KYC is, if you look at a classic corporation, 10,000 employees or whatever in different countries. I think KYC typically is very much scattered around the organization. So it's sometimes it's centralized where they get some questionnaires, and then they also get them decentralized from different banks. So I think the understanding from the corporates of the size of the problem is not really there. I don't think, and again, I've talked to hundreds of companies. It's very hard for them to actually, when I ask them, so how much time do you spend on KYC in a week? Nobody really knows. They just know it's a lot, but nobody really knows because Treasury owns it, legal owns some of it, tax owns something else. So I think it's really difficult for them to actually get those insights and get that size of the magnitude of the problem. And then of course, there's not really any systems in place to support this. Typically, it's done by Excel or Google Drives or SharePoint drives where they try to maintain some sort of documentation and send that back. It still doesn't really solve the questionnaires part. So I think there's a lot of different components to that problem. Why companies are fairly reactive and not proactive. And then the last thing I think, and I really hear that a lot, is that nobody, except us maybe, likes KYC. So nobody, if you look at an organization, nobody really wants to put their hand up and say, hey, I'm going to do the KYC here in the company. You rarely hear that anywhere. So I think people really don't want to, and to Egle's point, the banks, they're not doing this for fun, right? They need to do it. So I think it's a very different kind of conflict happening there. So fairly interesting as well.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm sure you have tons of horror stories, but for time, I think what we'll do is let me summarize these key problems, and then we can get to the heart of what our masterclass is about, which is the ways and the tips that you can solve this. So to summarize some of the problems we want to address in our tips and in our kind of approach is that the forms are long. In addition, the forms are all different, but they all have many of the same questions. And this combined puts companies in a very reactive situation, which is then, different from what I think most companies, individuals, we all want to be, which is like in this day and age, we're prepared, we're proactive, we're on top of everything. I think 2 or 3 other issues that we kind of talked about is that it sounds like there's no way to reuse any of the answers. So even though all these forms are the same, or we're answering the questions in a very similar manner, there's no way to use these answers or to reuse them. And in order to reuse them, you would need the answers to be stored somewhere, but it also doesn't sound like there's a storage system that's secure, that's centralized. So that's kind of another problem. And then I think lastly, what Lars kind of alluded to is that the volume of work can be pretty taxing, pretty heavy on just the volume from answering like these questions all the time. So with all of these kind of issues laid out, maybe Lars, I'll start with you. What's the first and kind of biggest tip that you would have for everyone for saving time on their bank KYC?
I think the best tip is try to find a way to stop repeating yourself. And I mean that in regards to the questionnaires, but also all the documentation, the passports, the utility bills, all the other documents that you need to find and scramble to find across the organization every time you get a KYC due diligence from any bank. It doesn't have to be a bank, it could be anybody else, which of course we also see increases. So I think this is probably the biggest thing, and it's not rocket science, but find some sort of technology, some sort of way to digitize this to make life a bit easier. Because if you don't do it, then you're never going to get rid of that Groundhog Day syndrome. I think that's probably my best advice.
Okay, yeah, and I know that that's great. That's a great tip. And I think even when it comes to digitization, I think even like Excel or SharePoint, things like that, in-house databases, anything is better than nothing.
Yes.
And I have to say, it's, in my experience, there's a lot of people I hear of that they don't have a system to put all this information in, that they're always like hunting around, or I hear these horror stories that things are in people's emails or notes app or random printouts on someone's desk on the 3rd floor. It's like, it's just not stored properly at all in a lot of organizations. So I couldn't imagine, doing the KYC work for us as well. I couldn't imagine not having a system to find the same thing, having a place to store it, it's secure, and it's always in the same place. So that's one good tip. What's another tip, Lars, that you have for this?
Well, I think that's probably pointing back to the documentation and the information. You know, find a way to collect all that information in the files. You know, we're looking at the UBO structure, the shareholders in the company, making sure that you have all this in one secure place, not sitting in emails or in random filing systems. And then, of course, the other important thing is that making sure that that this documentation is up to date. So having some sort of a calendar where you actually are aware of the expiry dates, but especially documents like utility bills, they tend to expire in certain countries every third month. So this is something where then you need to get back to the UBO or the CEO, who is really annoyed, by the way, that you're asking that person, you know, every third month for that document. But that's just the way it is. So I think just having some sort of structure there as well would also be a very good idea.
Okay, yeah, no, that's a really good one. And I personally advocate it because if anyone knows me, I definitely live only by calendars and reminders. So, but it is a lot of work to get all the information and put it somewhere, and then also like, you know, act on the reminders or you know, be able to get the information back. But still having a system to do this is better than not having the system and then having outdated information. So that's a great tip. Egli, what can you recommend to the audience?
Well, I think the calendar is very important, but it's also important to have some sort of rules in your life, right? So yeah, I would say that a standard internal process is something that is very needed, or how a lot of companies like to call it SOPs, the standard operating procedures, right? So everyone should have some sort of SOP with their own KYC responses, how they deliver that. So it could be a documented way of how you handle the KYC, right? And that procedure is important that it could be followed by the team to ease the process. So it makes it quick, it makes it, yeah, standard, but safe at the same time. For example, even a standard set of questions and files that the new shareholders need to answer, or the documents that they need to provide, right? It could be a very systematic way to collect it if you had those procedures on the table with you. So some sort of a framework on what to do and how to handle collecting the information, how to respond to the questionnaire forms is something that goes very well with the calendar planning.
Okay, that's a really good one. I am also a huge fan of documenting processes and checklists. So yeah, it's something I'm also famous for. But you know, honestly, that way you're always sure that what needs to be done gets done and nothing is missed. Egli, you mentioned just now that you know, a framework would be helpful. So maybe you could elaborate a little bit more on what a KYC framework would be.
Yeah, well, to simply put, how I imagine the framework and that standard operations procedures, right? So it consists of 4 main questions, right? It's why, what, how, and when. So that has to cover all of these 4. You cannot go without them. So what would be, what type of information and documentation should be provided? Because many companies have already experience with providing KYC information for banks, for other different shareholders. So the evaluation of the previous cases, of the previous responses, can be very helpful for those preparations. Then why? I mean, we talked about it throughout this masterclass, right? Because companies, they have to understand fully why they are doing this and what is the purpose, and that the outcome of providing the KYC is not the negative one. It's only the positive one for them and also for the financial institutions. And the how, of course, it's figuring out how to collect the what, basically, and find the most effective way to do it. And lastly, it's the when. So how often the rules of the KYC providing should be applied, and the step-by-step that will help to avoid all of the confusions that that might come up.
Well, that's a really good, yeah, that's a really good way of boiling it down. I really think it's a basic but very tangible and smart way to approach everything. Do you, either of you have any other final tips for our audience for this?
I think one could be that we see that quite a lot, that it's, maybe look for an extra set of hands. That could be in the form of a consultant company that actually go in and assist with the KYC.
Mhm.
And I know we had this great webinar earlier back in November, where our VP, Sunil, he also looked at the different options out there.
Yeah, no, that was a really great masterclass with Sune, who heads up our financial crime prevention team.
Yeah.
So we will also provide a link to that when the replay, when it's posted on our website, just so you can also watch that. So I think both of you have provided some really great tips for our audience here. The solutions are really key ways that you can save time, and I think they're great. But I also know, having a little bit of a backstory behind this is that there can be some sticky points for them. Maybe Lars, if you want to start on some of the sticky points, even though these 4 approaches are great, what can be problematic with them?
Yeah, I think some of them are classic, right? A lot of companies are using spreadsheets and Excel, for many different things, and they're also using it for KYC, but it doesn't, necessarily address the full problem, right, and cannot solve it. First of all, everybody knows spreadsheets, right? It's built by maybe a single person. If that person leaves, then nobody really takes over. It's not really secure. There's a lot of things there that can go wrong, right? It also takes time to build up this system and knowledge and understanding, right? So I think it's not the best. It's better than nothing. Let's agree on that. But it's probably, if you are of a certain size, it probably becomes a problem fairly soon, I would imagine. Yeah. So it's not something that we or I would recommend, for forever. But it's something at least to get started and maybe get an understanding. Okay, now we are here, and now we need to go to the next step and maybe getting a real system, some real system support behind it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know for me, sometimes depending on the spreadsheet or someone builds their own custom system, it's not always easily searchable. And so it's the information is sitting somewhere, but you have no way to figure out where it is. And that's really frustrating. Egli, what is some of your experience with that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, talking about the searchable information, right? Imagine if everything is in the emails, not even a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
So that's a bit even more confusing, right? But also very insecure when you think about it, like all the hackings and stuff. A lot of information can get lost, so you will be left with nothing. And the access to that information is also very limited when you think about the spreadsheets, as you Lars mentioned. What if the person leaves? So there's a lot of risk of losing that information and using it later. So then you go all over and over again through the same things.
Yes.
Yeah, I think Lars, we were talking about this before, but also just going back to the building of the in-house database is that when you do that, it's such a long and expensive process. It's always delayed. The tech teams will always have another internal project, or people kind of are working on it and then they move away and they forget. It just takes really a lot of time. And then I think going back to the calendar things, the systems, again, depending on how it's built or what technology it's built on, they don't remind you of when things expire. There's no, and in fact, to be honest, again, from my perspective, you shouldn't even get the reminder. Whoever needs to do it should be the one, getting the reminder. They update the document, and then it just adds it to the system so that as the person doing the KYC, you just always have the most up-to-date.
Yeah. Yes. And as a software guy, I'm not a fan of companies trying to build their own systems in-house, because there are software companies out there that actually this is what they do. They're really good at it. So I really believe in stick with what you know and do what you are doing. And a lot of companies, they're not really good at building in-house software, right? That's not what they are set out in the world to do. So I think they can find something out there that actually can solve the problem easier than trying to build their own.
Yeah, and I think if I may add as well, that those things they do not handle the complexity also of the ownership and control structure, right? This is something, if you're a big company, it gets too annoying and too hard to maintain as well. So this is something that adds extra stress to all of that.
Yeah, I think that is its own little monster. So I think we'll have to schedule a masterclass in that in the future for that all by itself. So I think, so again, we have these great tips. There are a couple of like problems that could arise with it. So Lars, I think, what's your thoughts on an even better way to save time on KYC?
Well, surprisingly enough, I think Avallone really has a good solution that actually can. And we spent 4 years building this. We spent plus 8 million euros building this platform. This doesn't come around easy or cheap. So I think, and then we have a lot of in-house domain experts like Egle that actually have helped us building the platform, right? So I think systems like Avallone's can something that can do a lot more better and more securely than building your own, or for sure.
Sounds good. I think maybe for the audience, did you want to maybe show the audience a little bit of the Avallone software just so they can kind of see what you're talking about and how it can solve some of the problems that we were talking about?
Yes. Let me try and share my screen. Can you see my screen? I hope you can. So just very quickly, because we have limited time, I just want to show the audience some of what we were talking about, and a lot of that is around the questionnaires and of maintaining data in the platform. And here I'm talking about KYC related data. Sorry. So in Avallone, we build everything on the legal entities. So we hook up KYC information and questionnaire data on the legal entities, because that best reflects the way that the companies need to share this back to any bank typically that will ask. So let me just show you how we do that. Now I just digged into our this demo data, which is the North American entity of this fictitious company. And here you can quickly see the overview of KYC data that we try to gather, or we help our clients gather. So the basic stuff, company name, registration number, of course, all this will be part of a questionnaire or any other form. So put it in here once, and then let Avallone send this back automatically to the bank. You don't need to sit and type this in every single time. So that's the easy part. Then, of course, all the documents that you can upload, attach, that you can also maintain here, where any document here also has expiry dates back to the point with the calendar, right? So you actually know when a document is about to expire. You will be notified. The person who owns the document will be notified. So super important. Then, of course, the questionnaires. So for every legal entity, when we onboard our clients, we will ask some foundational Q&A or some questions. So stuff like what are your source of wealth, source of funds, who are your suppliers, what kind of customers do you have? Because these are typically questions that the bank will ask you. So if we get a good set of answers to these questions, we can then reuse them across the full legal entity structure of the company, so they can send this back. But not only we do this, we also do it for FATCA CRS if you're in the US. Well, of course, with all the sanctions happening around now, if there are Russia-Belarus sanctions, we can build bespoke questionnaires that you can send back. Even here, in this case, we have a Swedish bank here, that customer due diligence. So we typically upload maybe your biggest cash management banks into the platform. So we already know the structure of these. And finally, just before I actually show how we actually create a case, of course, also back to the control and ownership structure, we at all time capture that full structure of the legal entities, all the way from the top to the bottom, all the way up to any UBO structure with indirect voting and ownership rights that you can share. You can share parts of it with any bank when they ask. So all of this is your library of KYC data that you can push back to any bank or any other counterparty that will ask. So that's the first thing. So let's just imagine now we are onboarded, we have all this data in here, and then we are good to go. And then we will receive the first, annoying questionnaire from the bank. And this is where you, in Avallone, we have this case management system where you can create a case. So typically what we do is just create a case. You can call it a KYC. It's from Danske Bank. And then we will ask you, okay, which legal entities are the bank asking about? Is it for the full group, or is it for specific companies or entities? And let's just say they're asking for a North American branch. Then who's asking? And again, it doesn't have to be a bank, as we discussed. It could be many others. We see questionnaires or due diligence from anybody. But in this case, it's a bank. Get an internal description, and when do the bank want it back? So they are fairly nice. They're giving us a month to get back to them, which is classic. Then of course, I'm sitting, let's just see, I'm Lars, I'm in treasury, but I don't want to sit with this alone. I'm going to involve Ada because she needs to carry some of the pain as well. So I'm going to invite Ada. So Ada will be notified on the platform that we received this questionnaire from Danske Bank. Then the only thing I need to do is basically just upload the questionnaire. That could be a PDF, an Excel file, or it could be a copy of the email, just upload it into the platform. And then what will happen is that we're going to take this analog document and then we're going to digitize it. And then we're going to map any questions and map it into all the answers that we have on the platform. And then we're going to create a digital questionnaire with all the data that we already have. We will capture, and then we will notify the client that, okay, there was 100 questions. We captured 86 of them. You have 14 left that you need to focus on. So they only need to focus on those 14 questions, or hopefully less, could be 1 or 2. And instead of that, they have to sit and answer every single question every single time. So that's how we actually do that in the platform. And this is probably the party trick of Avallone, because this is where Treasury really get excited, right? Because they feel this is a waste of their time, right? That they will sit and work on these manual questionnaires. Now they can upload it in, they can do something else more meaningful, and they can wait for us to come back. As you can see here, this is how it looks like when we are digitizing. They will wait a bit of time, and then we will come back and let them know if there's anything they need to work on. So I think this is where the magic happens, where we try to do something a bit more meaningful than what is happening today. I think also sensible of time. I think that's probably what I wanted to show.
Okay, I think that's great stuff. Yeah, also we want to have some time for more questions and things at the end. So I think one thing though, from what you showed, Lars, I think maybe like I see a question here with this, is that what if we get the questionnaires in different formats? Like, we said earlier that the banks all have their own template, their own format, their different styles. So what's the best, like, how does the system kind of handle that?
Yeah, so again, we can handle a lot of the different formats, right? So that could be PDF, Excel, or whatever. We typically handle. That's the great of being, we are a tech company, so we are pretty good at formats, and we can translate most of them. But if there are any formats that we don't understand or we cannot read, then of course we will have a chat with the bank, and typically what we also hear is that the banks, they are really excited about getting this high quality KYC data back. So they are also interested in actually delivering a format that actually makes sense. Because also remember that the banks are not doing this for fun, right? They typically have between 10 to 15% of all the employees in the bank is sitting in email. It's a huge cost driver for them, right? So they also want to reduce that number. And the only way they can reduce that is if they have to spend less time on KYC.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So then with all of this, is that how can someone take advantage of being on the system and then moving from one of the problems we talked about earlier, which is having a reactive approach, to now a more proactive or open approach?
Yeah. So I think, first of all, get your KYC data and your questionnaires in order, right? Making sure that you have that framework, what it is that we need to gather. We have templates when we onboard clients. We will send spreadsheets where we will help them, because we know, like people like Eglin know what the banks, how they think, what they will ask for, right? So we will help with those formats and those best practices. And then of course, make sure that you agree internally who is part of the KYC process and the team. Is Treasury alone? Typically it's not, because legal, they also own something typically around the legal entity structure. Tax will have something here to say as well. And then of course, is it centralized? Is it decentralized? Because big corporations, they have treasury teams also decentralized. So what are they doing versus the central treasury teams? And then of course, try to do this in small steps. Don't do a big bang, try to fix everything. That's also when we start onboarding with our clients, it takes around 6 weeks. So this is not a big ERP kind of project. What we typically do is that we onboard data onto the platform. And we do that step by step, and then we do a share with the bank. We look at the quality, and then we do another. And very rapidly, you would see that we would go from maybe you have 70-75% of all the data in there. And then after a couple of rounds with some of the big banks, when we receive some questionnaires, we'll get to 85-95% of all data being captured automatically by the platform. So it's Rome wasn't built in a day, right? But it doesn't have to be bigger than that. But do small steps as well, and that's also where we typically help. Yeah.
I think then also, we mentioned earlier, getting some outside help. So I think, I know that Avallone also has our solution, which is the form of managed service. Maybe Egle, you can talk a little bit more about what that is and what we offer for that.
Yeah, for sure. So when you think about it, and Lars mentioned not only once and twice and more, that there's in the companies usually there are a lot of people who are working with those requests, right? Some of them have the KYC teams, or some of them have just only one accountant who has worked up with all of the requests and really has no time for KYC. So that brings you down when you think about it, and that's really the last thing that the person wants to do at the very end of the day. So what we have is we have a team of professionals, and we offer our hands to our customers in helping to respond or collect those KYC requests that Lars showed. So the team behind digitizes the questionnaire. Even if it's needed, we can fill it out on the customer's behalf and then save the data for the further use. So that's the overall short picture of how it could look like.
Yeah, and I think just to continue on that one, first of all, most of our clients, when we talk to them, they are not looking to buy tech. They're looking to get a problem fixed, right? And that problem can be fixed by tech plus some services. Because back to my initial point, nobody really likes KYC. So a lot of companies just want to get rid of KYC and say, okay, we can outsource this for a fair price, we will do it. What we also see is, and what we also spend a lot of time is the advisory part of our services. So this is where we can set up, standard operating procedures, so we can build these frameworks for clients that we can see is also needed. Because the better you are equipped when you talk to a bank, and the better you can actually show a bank, this is our processes, this is our policies, the bank will just, the shoulders will fall down a bit and say, okay, we like you, we will not ask you so many questions. And a lot of this is actually trying to get the banks off your back. Because if they can see that, okay, they know what they're doing, they have some good policies, they have some good practices in place, we don't need to bother them so much. So there's also a lot of things that you can do to actually help yourself as well. And of course, we do a lot of training and refresher across all our client base. And we try to share a lot of the expertise, also because KYC is a moving target. There's new things happening all the time also in the EU, and how can you actually get those implemented fast and efficient?
Yeah, no, it sounds good. This is all really great stuff. So I want to have obviously some time for some final questions and wrapping up, but maybe before we get to that, any other benefits or tips that either of you have?
I think about when now we talked a lot about the responding part, where you are responding to KYC from a bank typically. But what we also see now is that this is a cycle, right? Companies are doing due diligence on each other like never seen before. So one thing is that you are great at responding, but you also a lot of companies also are now moving into what we call collecting and screening. So for example, if you are a corporate and you sell goods, you need to understand your customer base, you need to understand your supplier base. So you need to ask them, okay, who are you? Who owns you? Are any of you here on the sanctions list? We hope not, but we need to know. And the better you are at the collections, again, back to my initial point, the better you actually are seen from the banking perspective. Because the bank, they really understand collection, they really understand screening, that's what they do, and they're really good at it. They've been doing this for 25 years. So they really like when they see companies also being very diligent in this area. And in our world, connection and responding, those two ends meet at some point. because somebody will need to answer and then somebody will need to ask the question. And anything, in our dream scenario, this would happen electronically on a platform and without any emails being sent back and forth. So I think there's a lot of things here where there's a lot of work for a lot of companies to do, but we see the early baby steps being taken now. And of course, there are industries that are more, further ahead than others, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah.
Cool. Egli, what about you?
Yeah, I just think what Lars said is very, very important. And also to keep everything tidy, you have to spend time on the activities that drive the actual value and create a clear guidance on how to work easily. And I'm going back, yes, to the same procedures, but, having them in place, it would make everything around you less painful and make it a pleasant experience.
Okay. Sounds good. So I think I see there's one question that we have here, and if anyone else's questions, maybe is a good time to put them into the Q&A now. Mm-hmm. The first one, I feel like that's probably a great one for you, Lars. What would be your advice to companies who would like to start the transformation of their KYC processes? Where should they go?
Well, I think first of all, I think they need to understand their KYC situation today, right? Just to do an assessment and say, okay, how much time do we actually spend on KYC? We actually helped some of our clients creating questionnaires that they can send out to the different teams. So they are trying to calculate, okay, how many hours do we actually spend per week per team in our group just on KYC? Because it's very difficult to actually capture, and people forget how much time they actually spend. So getting understanding, first of all, okay, what is our benchmark? Where do we start from? And then, the next one is, okay, what kind of systems do we have in place? Do we have a legal entity management system? Do we have any other systems that we actually can use in any shape or form that actually can help us with KYC? I would say 9 out of 10, a lot of companies do not have any systems in place here. But just take a good hard look at your tech landscape and see, okay, what can we actually have? And then look at the other stuff that is important, right? Are you GDPR compliant today? Are you sending or receiving documents, according to the GDPR compliance? And it's frightening to see that doesn't happen a lot either. And then look at your risk profile as a company. If you are in a high-risk industry, it could be dual goods, dangerous goods. If you sell fertilizer, something like that, you probably already know this, but then you would also have a higher perceived risk by the banks. And then you would need to have a lot of things set into place. So I think that's also just get a good understanding, okay, where are we in this scenario? And I think if you have some of this, then you can start to actually have an overview and say, okay, this is where we need to start. And then start from, but don't try to fix everything in one go.
It's a great question. Yeah. And then we had another anonymous question. I think this one's probably a great one for you, Egli. In your opinion, what resources are needed for companies to succeed in mastering KYC?
Oh, this is a good one. So yeah, when you think about KYC, probably you first think about people, right? So that's one part of it. Then those people need to have knowledge. And the most important, they need time. So the time consumption, I think it can be reduced by using the right tools and knowing the process from A to Z, understanding the point where your company is, right? And since time is the most valuable resource that is exactly needed for mastering the KYC, I think that every company should seek ways how to reduce its consumption and make it just as quick and unpainful.
That's great. So thanks for you both for all these insights. I think in the last couple of minutes, because we also always like to wrap up a little bit earlier so people can have a little bit of time before their next meeting or session or whatnot, is that if I can summarize the main points of the tips from the masterclass for the audience and all the great points that Lars and Egli made today, it would be that one, maximize the use of technology and digitization. That's hard to say. Yeah, that's really key, kind of the overarching point. But I think second is to also gather all the key expiry dates or the key kind of important timing and dates of what your KYC is going to be like, and get that in a centralized calendar or schedule of some sort that you're monitoring regularly, which I think is also a fantastic tip. Third is to, Egli had setting up and using standard operating procedures. So basically in both how you respond to the KYC and also how you get to the information internally. So with the frameworks and the SOPs, that's really helpful and a great tip to manage your team in responding to bank KYC. And then finally, we touched a little bit upon that using outsourced help with manual tasks, or, like as Egli said, there's certain times of the year when the KYC workload is going to be larger because of what the bank schedule is, then to reach out and use external help where you can, because that will really alleviate some of the problems and get you to respond to all of these KYC questionnaires a little bit faster. So with that summary, I think as we kind of wrap up the session today, any final thoughts that either of you can leave with our audience?
Yeah, I actually I have one. What we have seen and what we see when companies start to work more professionally with KYC information and some sort of system support, is that they fairly quickly they come into a position where they can share KYC packages to the banks and any other counterparties, to your point, Ada, early on. So they are really proactive instead of reactive. So they are pushing out KYC information, full packages with all the relevant Q&As, because they know what they will ask for, all the right documents. And then they will nicely inform the banks and say, okay, dear bank, now you received a really nice KYC package from us. Think really hard before you come back and ask us again for more information. And in many cases, this actually works, especially when, with all the things that we discussed, if you know what you're doing, you have good, high quality KYC data, you have the right standard operating procedures in place, then the bank will say, great, we don't need to spend more time on this client. Also back to my initial point, they don't want to spend more time than needed on KYC, because it's a huge cost driver for them. So I think, and that's what our hope is, that the technology and the systematic support can actually help making this share easy and smooth. And of course, then only focus on if there's any changes. If you have changes in your structure, if there's a new UBOs, you will just send an update package to whoever needs those and say, okay, this is out, updates for the last month, and now you know. So I think this is something that we are working hard to hopefully, and it's not going to happen tomorrow, but we are already seeing early signs that this is a really, really good way forward.
Yeah, there's nothing like saving time as if not using time at all, or just proactively sending it off. So I think that's a really good tip. How about you, Egli? What's your final thoughts to leave with everyone in the audience?
Yeah, I just think that I'm one of those one of a few people who don't find KYC monsters very scary in my life. So I just wish that companies, they would not be afraid of that KYC handling, because it's not as bad as it seems. And yeah, my wish to everyone would be just to see it as a positive value bringing thing. And if in need of help, just do the research tools, research information, or anything else that is missing, just to make it easier and quicker.
Great. Well, those are two excellent tips. I wanted to, with that, I'm going to just kind of wrap everything up. Thank you, Egli. Thank you, Lars, for your time and all of your knowledge that you shared with everyone in the audience today. For anyone who is watching this after today's session via video, if you have any follow-up questions, Avallon's always here to help. So you can email us at hello@avallone.io. And with that, I want to thank everyone in the audience for your time, and have a great day. We'll see you in the next session that we have coming up. Bye.
Yes,
Bye.
thank you, Ada.
Thanks, Ada.
Thank you. Bye.